Apostle Paul. And so we've already covered first, second, and we just concluded the third missionary journey. But we're just looking at all the things where Paul went, things that he did, things that happened to him. And then we'll, as we move on in this study, we'll actually look at some of the epistles that he wrote. But we ended on last Wednesday in Acts 21. And so if you're looking at your study guide, we're in lesson 6. If you don't have a study guide, that's fine. We'll talk about the verses as we go through them. But we ended in Acts 21, and we had just read through and had began making comments about the section of verses 26 to 32. I'll read those again real quick. We've already sort of covered it, but just to pick up where we left off. Acts 21, beginning at verse 26. It says, "Then Paul took the men, and the next day purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification, until that an offering should be offered for every one of them. And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when they saw him in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him, crying out, 'Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple, and hath polluted this holy place.' For they had seen before with him in the city Trophimus, an Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. And all the city was moved, and the people ran together, and they took Paul and drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut. And as they went about to kill him, tidings came into the chief captain of the band that all Jerusalem was in an uproar, who immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them. And when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left beating of Paul." All right, so as I said, we read through that last week, made some comments about it, but essentially here what you've got is these Jews from Asia. Jews from Asia had been giving Paul trouble all throughout his journey, so it's not really anything new, but in this case, these Jews from Asia stirred up all these people, and they wanted to kill Paul. So this wasn't, this wasn't a situation where slight disagreement, kind of heated, but then they just walked away heated. They wanted to kill him. Their intent was clear, and they were trying to get help from others in order to try to kill him. In verse 28, they were saying, crying out, "Men of Israel, help us get this guy, because he's doing all these things." And they named several things. They had assumed falsely that he had taken a fellow named Trophimus, who was an Ephesian, into the temple. And so they were claiming, well, he was walking around with this Trophimus fellow. We had seen Paul with Trophimus. No doubt he took Trophimus into the temple, and so therefore he defiled the temple. That's one of the things they said he did. They said that he was teaching against, in verse 28, "This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place," and then brought Greeks into the temple. And so these were some accusations they were making against Paul. And we commented last week that Paul he wasn't against the Jews. Paul didn't hate the Jews. He didn't teach against Jewish people. He wasn't against the old law, and he wasn't necessarily against the temple. The temple had a purpose, the old law had a purpose, but he did teach that the time for that had ended. And so they sort of took what Paul was teaching and kind of made it out something that it wasn't to be, in order to get stirred up and say that he was against us and defile the temple and all these things. And so they were beating Paul, and they were about to kill him. Verse 30 says, "All the city was moved. The people ran together. They took Paul, drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut. And as they were about to kill him, then word came to the chief captain of the band that all Jerusalem was in an uproar." So this chief captain of the band, or maybe if you're reading a newer version, it says commander or something like that. The King James Version says chief captain. So he got word that we got trouble, and so this chief captain, this commander, is there to keep the peace. Of all things, we got to keep the peace. I don't want anybody to hear about anything happening on my watch. Well, now the whole city's in an uproar. We got problems. We're gonna have to calm that situation down. And so this chief captain in verse 32 took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the chief captains and the soldiers, they left beating of Paul. And so when the soldiers came running down, all the people that were mad at Paul held off on beating him because they were fearful, I guess, obviously, of getting into some trouble that way. All right, so that's basically where we're ready to start into new territory. But does anybody have any questions about this section here? We were answering question 2, if you're looking at your lesson guide, about who stirred up the crowd and what did they falsely assumed. Any comments? Any questions? All right. Let's move on. Number 3 in the study guide says, read Acts 21:33 to Acts 23:10. We're not going to read that whole section. But in that section it says, tell of several failed attempts by the commander to determine what crime Paul had committed. All right, so from this point forward, we're going to start looking at, so they made some accusations we just mentioned. At this point forward, they're really going to try to get Paul into trouble, I guess legally. And they're going to try to bring some accusations against him or crimes against him, but it's kind of interesting to watch how this plays out. So if you're there in Acts 21, look at verse 34. Acts 21:34, it says, some cried one thing, some another among the multitude, and when he could not know the certainty for the tumult, he commanded him to be carried into the castle. And when he came upon the stairs, so it was that he was borne of the soldiers for the violence of the people, for the multitude of the people followed after, crying, away with him. So this chief captain, and I guess I skipped over verse 33, the chief captain took him, commanded him to be bound with 2 chains, demanded who he was and what he had done. So this chief captain asked Paul, what have you done? Which is pretty reasonable. I mean, if the whole city, if the whole city is in an uproar because of you, and everybody's saying, get that guy, get him, I think it'd be pretty reasonable for the commander to go and say, what's your name and what did you do? How did you make everybody mad? And verse 34 just mentions, well, some people were saying one thing, some another. They were just all shouting out stuff that he had supposedly done, and he couldn't figure out what kind of crime we're dealing with here. What do you think, Wade?
I was listening to this podcast on history here lately, and they've got Jacksonian here, and he was talking today about how when Andrew Jackson was running for president, these pamphlets came out about his wife, about how immoral his wife was. Well, his wife wasn't immoral. These were just accusations that they were making.
Yeah.
But the point that I was trying to make is that all throughout history, if people don't want something, they don't like something, they don't care what they have to say. They say anything they want to just to get the job done. I think it's the same thing here.
Yeah.
It was the same thing with Jesus. They're just calling out stuff. Anything that they feel like the people will listen to, they're going to call it out and make, so they can get somebody on their side.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Unfortunately, the nature of people, if I'm not going to get my way, then I gotta get rid of you if you're opposed to me somehow. And so if I can't get rid of you in a legitimate way, then maybe I'll get rid of you by saying, well, Wade did all these things. That's basically what they did to Paul. They started coming up with these kind of accusations. But so this commander was trying to figure out what was going on, which that's commendable. He should do that, not just assume that Paul was in the wrong. But he couldn't figure out what was going on. He showed up on the scene. There's a guy getting beaten. Everybody's in an uproar. I think you would assume that somebody had done something wrong if everybody was out to get him. Brian could probably do a better job of telling us, how this should go. But, you show up on a scene. You get called out to a scene, we got trouble over here. And you try to figure out what's going on. Everybody's mad at this one guy, so evidently he must have done something. And then you start looking into it. Well, what did he do? Well, they're saying that he's teaching against the Jews, and these people are saying he defiled the temple, and they're wanting to kill him. What's going on? And so you kind of got to do a little bit of investigation to figure out what's going on. Skipping down, like I said, we're not going to read through all of these verses that were mentioned, but if you skip to chapter 22 and look at verse 24, now Paul had given some defense here. We're kind of skipping over Paul's defense, which is important, but just for time's sake, we won't read through all that. Paul had given a defense. After that, in verse 24, it says, the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle and bade that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? And he said, Yes. All right, so now Paul did give a defense, and he tried to make a defense for what was going on from his perspective. And so this chief captain, we got all these people in an uproar. We got Paul saying he hasn't done anything wrong. What are we going to do to settle this situation, to calm it down? Well, the decision he made was, well, we'll go and whip him up pretty good. We'll scourge him. We've talked about scourging. Jesus was scourged. And so that's not like a slap on the wrist. I mean, they're going to beat him up pretty badly, and then maybe that'll help us be able to figure out why they were so upset against you, is what he basically said in verse 24. If you're examined by scourging, that he might know wherefore they cried so against you. So you can't let things get too out of hand. And so what we were saying in the beginning is you're there, the commander's there to keep the peace. And so if everybody's mad at this one guy, well, I can whip him up pretty good and maybe keep them all calm till I figure out what's going on here. And that's basically how he decided to handle that. The issue was, though, he didn't know that Paul was a Roman citizen. And Roman citizens have rights. And you can't just go and do that to a Roman citizen without making sure they're charged with something, found guilty of something. There's a process there. And so once he found that out, the centurion found it out based upon a conversation with Paul. This centurion went to the commander and said, Hey, you better be careful what you're doing. He is a Roman. And so that kind of shut the whole process down. So, go ahead.
They listened to Paul for a while there.
Yeah.
Paul was giving his defense and telling them all he had done, how he had treated the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
But he come down to the point where he says, I'm going to also go to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
That did it.
Yeah, that did it. Yeah. In verse 21, that's where he said that, I'll send thee far hence to the Gentiles. In verse 22, it says they gave him an audience to this word. So they listened. We'll listen to what you got to say, Paul. They mentioned Gentiles, and then they were done with him. We're Jews, and we're not listening to that nonsense about Gentiles. Yeah. So we've got rights in our country as American citizens. It'd be unlawful if we were picked up, hauled off, and taken to jail without, what are you charging me with? And so I guess we can argue, is it a fair, legitimate charge or not? But you got to charge me with something. You can't just pick me up and take me to jail and without a charge. Basically, that's the situation Paul was dealing with here. Until they found out he was a Roman citizen, hold on, he's a Roman citizen. We can't just do that to him. And so that sort of shut this whole thing down. But to this point, we still don't have a crime. We still don't know what Paul has done. We still don't know what he's charged with. This commander still hasn't been able to determine why they want to kill him. All right. Any other questions, comments? Go ahead.
I'm curious, back 21, back to those charges in chapter 21.
Yes.
28.
Yeah.
Is one of those charges legitimate by bringing Greece into the temple? They weren't really allowed in there, were they not?
No, but I think verse 29 answers it. But said they had seen Trophimus, who was an Ephesian, and they didn't have. It wasn't like 2 or 3 of them saw Trophimus in the temple, and they said, "There's Trophimus." They had just assumed that he had brought Trophimus into the temple. So as far as I know, he hadn't. Yeah, as far as I know, he hadn't. They just assumed it, So they had seen Paul with Trophimus, and they knew that Paul was always in the temple. So I think they just drew the conclusion, no doubt, Paul brought that guy into the temple. They had supposed that he had done it, just assumed that he had done it. And, sometimes assumptions can be right, but in this case, it seems like they assumed wrong. And I think they had already thought, well, he hates the Jews. He hates the old law. He doesn't care anything about this temple, and we saw him with Trophimus the other day. I bet you he took Trophimus into the temple, and so I think that was the issue there. All right, well, let's move on. Question number 4. It says, "What encouragement did the Lord give Paul?" According to Acts 23 and and verse 11. I want to begin reading at verse 1 of Acts 23 because we're covering a lot of ground here, and this study isn't intended to be a verse-by-verse one, but let's read Acts 23 beginning at verse 1, and then we'll get down to verse 11 and see the encouragement that he was given. Acts 23:1 says, Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then Paul said unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall, for sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. But when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel had spoken to him, let us not fight against God. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force among them, and to bring him into the castle. And the night following the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. All right, so, here's another situation where Paul has now it's not him that stirred the people up, but they're just, everything Paul says, people are getting bent out of shape. In this case, he's standing before the council, just really making a defense. This council is made up of Pharisees and Sadducees. So the Pharisees believe in the resurrection, but the Sadducees do not. And so Paul makes this comment that he was basically on trial for the resurrection of the dead in verse 6. Well, then now they're all bent out of shape again at him. And I have to believe it's being literal there in verse 10 where it says that the commander, he was fearing that Paul would have been pulled in pieces of them. I mean, I think they were ready to kill him, these people in the council. So to me, this kind of, I don't know if it's fair or not, but it kind of reminds me of like a political type of scenario where somebody says something and the other side is just absolutely against that. The Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. And so Paul made that comment, and they were not happy about that. The Pharisees did believe in the resurrection, so it was their response was actually, hey, listen, if an angel has spoken to him in verse 9, then we don't want to fight against God. We sort of agree with him here. He's making some good points. The Sadducees didn't feel that way, but the commander felt like they were going to absolutely pull him apart. But the question we're answering is, what encouragement did the Lord give Paul? Well, in verse 11, it says, The Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. So the Lord stood by Paul at night and basically told him, you can be of good cheer because you're going to go to Rome. The Lord's plan was for Paul to get to Rome. And so even though it looks like, these people may kill you here at Jerusalem, you're going to Rome. So know that. And it wasn't just, it wasn't some prophet or it wasn't even an angel. It says the Lord stood by him and gave him that encouragement. So we talked about a lot of things there. You got any comments or questions or anything about what we read there in Acts 23? We're not doing a verse by verse study. There's some interesting things that happen there. All right, any comments, anything? Well, go ahead.
I can't recall. I remember one time, I can't recall, Jesus, he was conversing with the Sadducees and Pharisees, and he asked the question, I forget what was now. I can't recall it. He turned them against each other there by asking a question about the resurrection.
Yeah.
work out life well for him now.
Yeah, well, he sure got him upset for sure. I do think it's interesting that at the very beginning he spoke out against this fellow that he didn't know was the high priest, and then he kind of had to say, well, yeah, I didn't know that was the high priest there. Go ahead, Wade.
So I think, this kind of gets, of course, there's 5 classes of the Jews. These are 2 of the classes that we're talking about, which are the most predominant classes. The Pharisees are the largest of the class, but the Sadducees are the root of the class. So that could be the reason that, we're talking about the high priest at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how many of each class were there. But
Right. That's true. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. In this council, I assume primarily Pharisees, Sadducees, that he got them all stirred up. I think sometimes there's a question about how Paul answered. Well, where's it at? Wherever he said, "I'm a Pharisee," verse 6. Do you think Paul was trying to get out of trouble? I mean, do you think maybe he was saying, "Hey, hold on, guys, I'm a Pharisee. I'm the son of a Pharisee," maybe to try to get on their side and kind of get out of trouble here? Because, I mean, these people are mad. I mean, these people want to kill you. And not a lot stopping them from killing you. Do you think Paul compromised compromised his faith by saying, "I'm a Pharisee" there? What do you think about that? Go ahead, Wade.
I think Paul, it's kind of like today, sometimes we may say, I was where you were at one point. I believe what you believe.
Yeah.
And at this point, I've done a lot of studying in my life, and I've made a change. And this is why I've made a change. And I think that was what Paul was at this point. He was just trying to say, I'm sympathetic to you because I know I've been to where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. Or maybe there's a situation where, religiously there's a discussion and somebody, I don't know, whatever topic, maybe somebody says, I believe in baptism for the remission of sins, but maybe they believe a lot of different things. And you say, well, hey, listen, I believe that too. I mean, I agree with you on that point. But I think you're right. His past, he was able to say, I'm a Pharisee, son of a Pharisee. I'm understanding your position. I'm understanding that I believe in the resurrection of the dead. I don't think Paul sold out to try to get out of trouble, but I have heard maybe some people try to make that argument. I think he's relating to his background.
I don't think he was sold out, but I also
Yeah.
think maybe the end result of that is in 7. Once he said that kind of divided the
Oh, yeah.
dissensions. Maybe he was
Yeah.
trying to take the
Yeah.
focus off of him and get them
Well, that's true.
more looking to themselves.
Well, yeah, it sure didn't calm him down. But yeah, maybe he was trying to.
But they started going after each other.
That's right, they did. Yeah, I mean, so they were going after each other. Paul seems to be caught in the middle of it. Evidently, in verse 10, this commander, this chief captain, I mean, he thought they were going to, like it says, he feared that Paul would have been pulled in pieces, and so he commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force and to bring him. So the King James Version says bring him to the castle. Newer versions may say the barracks or something like that where the soldiers are staying. Basically, just get Paul out of that situation and get him to a safe place. And then that night following is when the Lord spoke to him and told him, "You're going to go to Rome, so be of good cheer, Paul."
Don't you think that that's for our benefit too?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I do.
So,
I do.
Paul tells a story at least 2 or 3 times in the scriptures.
Yeah.
And I think, we look back on Paul and we see for evidence, of his belief in Jesus. We're seeing a guy that was an extremist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously most Jews didn't kill Christians. Or they didn't stand there and judge them, to go to death. So obviously his position was extreme. And now his position has totally changed. Well, what changed? Because we look at that too. When we teaching our, people that don't believe in Jesus, we say, hey, here's a point. Here's a case study of a guy that, was totally against him, and then he made a change. Why? Why did he make a change? And that's exactly what he's doing to those people.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, he was a great persecutor and now great preacher and advocate for. I think you're right. All right, number 5 says, what caused the commander to transfer Paul to Caesarea? So we'll pick up right there where we are in verse 12. Let's read to verse 24. Acts 23, verse 12. It says, when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. And they were more than 40 which made this conspiracy. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great curse that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now therefore ye and the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though he would inquire something more perfectly concerning him. And we, or ever he come near, we are ready to kill him. When Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath certain thing to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, which hath something to say unto thee. Then the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him aside privately and asked him, what is it that thou hast to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldest bring Paul tomorrow into the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. But do not thou yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now are they ready, looking for a promise from thee. So the chief captain then let the young man depart and charged him, see thou tell no man what thou hast showed me these things. And he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70, and spearmen 200 at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide them beasts that they may set Paul on and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. All right, so quite a bit of reading there. Basically, what had happened here was 40 men had got together and had decided, we're going to put ourselves under an oath. So the King James Version calls it a curse, but it's an oath. We're going to take this oath. We are not going to eat or drink until we kill Paul. So, I don't know. Wade, how long can you go without eating or drinking anything? Yeah, well, that's true. And how much physical activity you're doing, yeah? Yeah, but you can't go too awfully long. I mean, it's not like, this is a pretty short-term plan. I mean, if a group of people got together and said, we're not going to eat or drink until we go accomplish this task, you would imagine, well, they're probably wanting to get that done today or, within the next 24 hours. Maybe a little bit longer. But they said, we're not going to eat or drink until we kill Paul. That's what we're going to do. And it was not just one person, not just 2 or 3 people that have just gone off the deep end. It was 40 of them had got together and said this. And they went to the chief priests and elders and told them their plan. We've taken this oath. We're not going to eat or drink till we kill Paul. And so in verse 15, basically what they said was, go up there and get Paul and just act like you're going to bring him back down here and just act like you want to ask him some more questions. Paul, we want to really better understand your position, where you're coming from. So just go tell him that, bring him down here, and what we'll do is, we can't go up there where he's all protected, where these soldiers are, but if you get him out here coming down this way, we'll basically attack him and we'll kill him. And so that was the plan. You would think that maybe the chief priests and elders would say, you guys are way off base. You can't be doing any of this nonsense. But anyway, they told them. And so then in verse 16, it says, Paul's sister's son. I always think that's interesting because we don't really read about. So Paul's got a nephew. He's got a sister. He's got a son. He heard about this plan. Don't know how he heard about the plan. And so we can speculate on that. But he heard about the plan. He went to Paul and told him about the plan. Paul called one of the centurions and said, let my nephew go talk to the chief captain. And then the young man went and told the chief captain. The chief captain said, don't tell anybody that you have told me these things. And then in verse 23, this chief captain or this commander called 2 centurions and said, make ready 200 soldiers. Now, we always say a centurion is over 100 people. So you got 2 centurions, 200 soldiers. So that makes sense. then get 70 horsemen. The King James Version says 70, 70. And then 200 spearmen at the third hour of the night. So now the way they kept time, the third hour of the night would be about 9 p.m. would be the third hour of the night. So at 9 o'clock at night, this commander got 470 soldiers ready to get Paul and take him to Felix, the governor at Caesarea. So he took this thing pretty seriously. Now the question says, what caused him to transfer Paul to Caesarea? Well, what caused him was, they were going to kill him one way or another. They had said they wanted to kill him. A couple different instances, they had really gotten worked up. Well, now there was people that dedicated themselves. We're not going to eat or drink until we kill Paul. And so he basically had no other choice. So our map doesn't, well, let me see. I'm not the map expert, but let me see if I can. All right, so Paul's in Jerusalem. This is where this chief commander's at. And we're just going a short distance to Caesarea, which is right here, kind of on the coast. I looked at it today. It's like 74 miles. So, I don't know how long that would take them to get there with all these people getting packed up. But they packed Paul up, and they were going to get him up there because that's where Felix was sitting. Now, Felix was like the leader of that area, that territory. And we're familiar with Felix. We'll get into that. We're familiar with that story about him. But this commander just said, I can't continue to have all this trouble down here. We got to get Paul out of here, or they're going to kill him. And so taking it seriously, he got all these men together to get Paul out of there. All right, you see anything? Got any questions, comments? Anything about that? Getting Paul from Jerusalem to Caesarea. All right. Well, the next question says, read the letter which Claudius Lysias, the commander, sent to Felix. And the question says, what lie do you find in the letter? All right, so this letter is found in Acts 23, beginning at verse 25, just the very next verse there. So this is the letter of the commander to Felix. All right, it says, he wrote a letter after this manner. Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent governor Felix, sendeth greeting. This man was taken of the Jews, and should have been killed of them. Then I came with an army and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth unto their council, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. And when it was told me how that the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to his accusers also to say before thee that they had against him. Farewell. All right. Did you see anything in that letter that this Claudius Lysias sent to Felix that wasn't true? What do you think, Joseph?
Pretty much it sounded more like platitudes. It sounded like he was trying to hope to get something out of this, trying to make him look good, sort of like the hero after he captured the saved the little guy, and all of a sudden he started bragging and saying, "Oh, I did this," even though he didn't exactly do everything, but he sort of did.
I think you're right. This is this is what you would expect from somebody that is, again, I hate to compare it to politics, but it's kind of like politics. I got to make myself look good in this thing. So when I write this letter, most excellent Governor Felix, I've got this man here, and he was going to be killed by the Jews, but I came and basically I handled this situation because I understood that he was a Roman. The issue is, though, he said that he came and rescued him because he knew that he was a Roman, but that's not true, is it? He came and rescued him after he was already bound. Remember, he was going to go and have him scourged, and then that centurion found out he was a Roman and went and told the commander, "Hey, you better be careful what you're doing. This guy's a Roman." And so the lie is he didn't go get him because he knew he was a Roman. It was when he was getting ready to scourge him, he found out, oh, he's a Roman. I better check up. What do you think, Tom?
Early on, before the scourging, when they came in and separated from the Jews the first time, the Romans thought he was this Egyptian that was really, causing all this problem. And the guy, talked to him at that time and found Roman citizen. And evidently that didn't get relayed when when they took him to the barracks, and another centurion was going through and, was looking at Spurgeon. So the chain of command had really been followed all along. And so this guy that is in charge now is just going through and taking the information that he had, superimposing it up a little earlier. Yeah, he found out he was a Roman, but, it was later on.
Yeah. Well, and we don't want to put anything in there that's going to question, that I had this guy bound and we were about to scourge him. And then I found out he's a Roman, then I shut it down, because that would make me look a little bad. That'd make me look like I didn't really know what was going on under my watch. So I can't have that. So he tried to make himself look good. He also hadn't quite, so he said there at the end of the letter that, he said in verse 30 that he had given commandment to the accusers also to say before thee, talking to Felix, what they had against him. But he hadn't actually done that yet either. But he in the letter to Felix, he said, I've already told the people that accused him, you need to go talk to Felix. You got to present your case in front of Felix. But he hadn't actually done that either. Go ahead.
He took this threat pretty seriously, because evidently there was like a powder keg that came up. Because evidently these guys were, the oath that they'd taken, they were going to do it whatever it cost. And there was probably a good chance that some of these Roman soldiers were going to get killed along with Paul. And so then when you start seeing that situation, then you start seeing why was there 270 some or more.
Yeah, 470, yeah.
Individuals were taken, on Caesarea.
Yeah.
It was also protecting that and getting them away far enough away so that that didn't happen, on his watch as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, a lot of different things could have happened. So a Roman soldier could have got killed in this skirmish, or maybe, what if these 40 guys go through with their plan and then you kill some of these Jews and then you got more Jews upset? These soldiers are just going rogue and killing citizens that are innocent. Who knows? And then that blows up and this commander's sitting here and all this is happening under, this kind of reminds me, people treat me like this at work because I work at the corporate office, and you call people to ask about something, got a customer complaint, and I call to a store and I say, hey, I got a customer made this complaint. I need to figure out what's going on there. I need to talk to a few people. And they're like, oh no, and everybody clams up, because this thing's about to blow up. I'm about to start finding out what's going on and who's at fault, and people get real odd acting whenever I do that. But I think he was trying to guard against that. I don't want anybody coming down here and really looking into our business down here. So we got to get Paul out of here. So he got these 470 soldiers ready to go. It's at 9 p.m. We're getting Paul out of here. We're getting him to Caesarea to Felix. So he absolutely took it serious. All right, let's go to chapter 24 and let's introduce this. What happens? These charges that are brought whenever Paul actually gets up there to Caesarea. Let's read Acts 24, beginning at verse 1. It says, after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, we accept it always in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear of us thy clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. So we skipped over a few verses at the end of the last chapter, but they got Paul on to Caesarea. A few days had passed, 5 days had passed. And then this high priest and the elders came, and they had an attorney with them. They had this lawyer with them, real slick guy named Tertullus. And so, if you're going to bring a case before, Felix, a governor, you want to have somebody in there that's going to be a smooth talker. I mean, it happens, unfortunately it happens in our courts today. I mean, you have an attorney that's pretty slick and can present a case. And so he really lays it on thick when he opens up. He's really stroking Felix's ego. We're so great. We're so thankful to be under your leadership. Basically, is what he says in the first few verses there of Acts 24. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but it's just so thankful for you to have the opportunity to hear our case. I mean, he really just laid it on thick, this Tertullus. But what he actually says was, the question is, let's try to summarize the charges. Verse 5, he says, we found this man a pestilent fellow. I think newer versions just say a pest. A mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world. A ringleader of the sect of the Nazarene. Verse 6 says he's gone about to profane the temple. And would have judged according to our law, but then he basically then says, well, this Lysias guy took him away from us, and so we couldn't handle it the way that we wanted to. So the charges, they're not legitimate charges. I mean, can you imagine somebody being arrested today and like, okay, what's the charges against the guy? Well, he's a pest. I mean, just a real pest. And he's a mover of sedition. He's just getting everybody worked up wherever he goes. And then besides that, he's a ringleader of this religious sect. Okay, well, what did he do? I mean, what crime did he commit? What law did he break? Well, they don't really have anything like that. Just that he's a pest. And so it's pretty interesting. So you got a really slick attorney here named Tertullus that's bringing these accusations. But there's really no case. He really doesn't have any case to present. And so if we summarize the charges, I guess I would say, well, I mean, they're just bogus charges. I mean, maybe he is a pest, but that's not a legitimate charge. Anybody got any thoughts about this? Go ahead, Tom.
The way he presented it, he sort of twisted the knife in the commander thing. He sort of, well, if this guy would have stepped in, we would have handled it for you, and he wouldn't be here bothering you.
Yeah.
So, he sort of shifts the blame to the commander for the whole situation.
Yeah.
He blew it out of proportion. We could have taken it.
That's true. I didn't think about that.
And he exaggerated too. He said all the Jews. Well, no,
Yeah.
there were a lot of Jews that were had converted and things. And it mentioned there before when he first came, there were over 1,000 or several thousand that were Christians in the area. So.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but yeah, he did kind of. Yeah, so Felix, if you could just get this, we can take him back to Jerusalem and take care of him ourselves, and then of course they probably killed him on the way. But all right, well, we'll try to pick up there next week. So if you got a study guide, mark your page there at question number 8. Appreciate everybody's attention.